Oh, Chris, what a character! Having a protagonist that is separate from the player is such a unique concept, and definitely unique to Deltarune. Oh. Chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune recently released, and by recently I mean like a month ago, and the development of Chris's and the player's relationship made me interested in revisiting a topic I've been interested in since I first joined the Undertale fandom way back in 2015. And that is, what is the relationship between the player and the humans in Undertale? Because I think Deltarune provides us with some hindsight to reveal some pretty interesting things, and I've cooked up a theory that changes the way we see the soul in both games. For the purposes of this video, I think it's better if we start with the information we receive on a playthrough through Undertale, starting with the pacifist route. As you all know, the game begins with a cutscene showing the first human falling to the underground before prompting us to name the fallen human. This name is the one that shows up in the battle menu, the regular menu, and the save menu. Clearly, this is meant to make the player believe they are Chara, or whichever name they choose. The illusion starts to shatter when we reach Nilhome, where right before the fight with Asgore we find a casket with what we believe her name is, and is fully broken in the true pacifist route in the True Lab, where we discover Chara was actually Toriel and Asgore's adopted child that died a long time ago. And we finally get our protagonist's real name after the Asriel fight, Frisk. So that settles it, right? We play as Frisk and Chara is just some kid that died some time ago. But then why does the game try so hard to make us believe we're Chara? Why did Asriel think we were Chara? Even he doesn't know. And most importantly, why does Flowey beg us to not reset the timeline and let Frisk be happy? Wasn't Frisk the one with the power to save? Aren't we Frisk? Hold on to that thought. Because in the genocide route, we see nearly the opposite. Not only does Flowey recognize us as Chara nearly immediately, but we also have various dialogue options just straight up confirm that. All this new information, plus the inconsistencies I've already pointed out in the pacifist ending, my natural conclusion will be that we play as Chara, who is somehow also possessing Frisk. That would explain why the game wants us to believe we're Chara, why their name shows up in all the menus. It would even explain the difference in attitude between the two routes. In the pacifist route, the more kind-hearted Chara wouldn't want to infringe on Frisk's life despite possessing them, so Chara wouldn't go introducing themselves as Chara, and would even let Frisk talk to Asriel as Frisk. While in the genocide route, the more cold-blooded Chara wouldn't give a shit about Frisk, so they would just go saying, "I am Chara," willy-nilly and killing everyone no matter what Frisk wants. You know, that kind of reminds me of something. And that would be my theory if it wasn't for one thing. One little thing that ruins everything. The ending.
Greetings. I am Chara. Thank you. Your power awakened me from death. My human soul, my determination, they were not mine, but yours.
Now, this dialogue would make sense if we, the player, were Frisk. But since we aren't, this creates three different problems. Number one, if we aren't Chara and we aren't Frisk, then who the hell are we? Number two, most people speculate that Frisk arriving on the underground was what awoke Chara. But they specifically say, "Your power awakened me from death." If we aren't Frisk, then how did we do that? And why only now? And number three, if the soul Chara used is ours, the player, but the player isn't Frisk, then where is Frisk's soul? No theory I've seen for Undertale these last 10 years could satisfyingly answer all three of these questions for me. But I think I did it, with some help from Deltarune. So without further ado, this is my theory. Theories. It's a two-part theory. My first theory is that red souls don't exist, in the sense that they aren't natural. The traits we associate with each colored soul comes from the ball game in Snowdin. Bravery, justice, integrity, kindness, perseverance, patience, but there is no description for the red soul. I mean, I guess it could be ball game, but I somehow doubt it. The fan interpretation that red means determination has no evidence behind it, other than that a word shows up in red somewhere completely different in the game. In fact, I'm pretty sure it can't be determination, as that's like the one thing we know all human souls share. That's why they persist after death, and that's how Alphys gained determination for her experience. Also, perseverance is a synonym for determination, and if Toby wanted determination to be a trait, he probably would have given the purple soul a different one. However, the ball game does give us an interesting prompt for what the red soul means. Red, try as you might, you continue to be yourself. Isn't this a really weird way to phrase it? Try as you might? It's as if despite your best efforts you continue to be you, not because of them. Well, here's my theory. Red souls don't naturally occur. The ball game only says 6 traits because human souls can only be one of 6 colors. The trait of the red soul is you, the player, and your control over the player character. That's why both of our protagonists have red souls, and why they're the only humans we've seen with red souls. Try as they might, they continue being you. Now that I've explained my understanding of the red soul, it's time to pivot to what is sure to be the most controversial part of my theory. I think Chara is a vessel. I know, not even 2 months has passed and the Deltarune fanbase is already back with the crackpot theories. But hear me out! I have 3 pieces of evidence as to why I think this is the case. My first point is the question we asked at the end of Pacifist. Why does the game want us to believe we're Chara? Ezreal/Flowey mistaking us as Chara makes sense, since the genocide route proves that Chara has at least some influence on Frisk. But now that we know we are a separate entity, why would we mistake Frisk for a kid we aren't even supposed to know yet? But if Chara was supposed to be our vessel and we ended up in Frisk instead, it all suddenly starts to make sense. We think Frisk is Chara because Chara is who we should be controlling. Also, at the start of the game, where we name the fallen human, doesn't it remind you of something? Naming the fallen human in Undertale and naming our vessel in Deltarune are the only moments in both of these games where we are prompted to name something, and they use the exact same language. Language that implies that we have some sort of authority to give this human child a name, which wouldn't make sense unless they're a vessel. And no, our own name doesn't count. The text using the sequence only says your name, which I think is some very deliberate wording. My second point, I admit, is the most dubious. We know in Deltarune that the name in the save files matter, since Chris already had a save file that we overwrite with our own file and our own name. And in Undertale, whose name do we see on the save files we save? The fallen human, which again implies some sort of authority or connection between us and Chara, suited for a vessel. Of course, the problem with this point is that we see our own name in the Deltarune save files, not the one we gave to the vessel. However, hear me out, when you put the same name as the vessel's and your own in the Gunnar Maker sequence, we see the following message. Of course they are the same. Which, to me, implies that we canonically gave the fallen human our own name in Undertale, which solves this problem, but I can see why you'd think this is a hole in my theory. But my third point, I think, is my strongest. The wording of the genocide ending. Partner. Chara calls us their partner, which, I think implies a relationship that already existed before the events of the game. And actually, we already know what it was. When describing the revival, Chara says, "Our plan had failed, hadn't it?" Now, you could say that "our" is Chara and Ezreal, but I think with everything I've shown you up to this point, and the context of the scene where they're talking to us, that this implies that we were already controlling Chara before their death, and we were at least partially responsible for the plan to cross the barrier. Now, before you say, "Oh, but how can this be the case if the game hadn't even started yet?" Deltarune actually gives us the answer. We know that the player, as a character represented by the Red Soul, can already exist before we actually start playing because of the birdcage, Toriel's Chapter 2 dialogue, and Noelle saying Chris once pretended to rip their heart out in front of her. So we are responsible for Chara's death, we bring them back to life, and the first thing they do as a ghost, look to us for guidance, for us to give them a purpose in this afterlife. If that isn't vessel behavior, I don't know what is. We were with Chara during their life. We were with Chara during their death, which is why now that I've laid out my theory, this is how I think the events of Undertale unfolded. We, the Red Soul, inhabited Chara at least since the period in the Underground, where we were a kind master, or not, we don't know, but eventually we created a plan to free the monsters from the Underground that Chara, as our vessel, was more than willing to carry out. However, due to Ezreal's interference, our plan failed, and both Chara and Ezreal died. With our vessel suddenly discarded, we possessed the first human compatible, just like in Chapter 1 of Deltarune, which was many years later when Frisk finally arrived in the Underground, though we don't realize it's a different vessel, possibly because we were unconscious during the waiting period. Through our own determination, sparked by our newfound lucidity, our previous vessel, Chara, is brought back to life as a spirit, and we tell them their new purpose through our actions throughout the game. Now, what does this imply for Deltarune? Well, Frisk is a much more obedient vessel compared to Chris, aren't they? We do get to see a glimpse of this obedience from Frisk in Undertale. I don't know who was the first one to point this out, so I'm sorry that I can't give you credit, but the community has paid a lot of attention to this moment during the date with Undyne, where if you selected the soda, Frisk does so with a frown, revealing their disagreement with the choice, something Chris does plenty of throughout Deltarune, but Frisk also, doesn't do anything to stop us from killing everyone in the Underground, which, well, I can't see Chris doing. So why is that? Well, isn't it kinda weird that Chris's name is one letter short of being an anagram to Frisk? I think this letter represents the missing component that is stopping us from taking full control of Chris. The fallen human. Not that I think F literally stands for fallen human, there just being a missing letter is much more important than what it stands for, if it even stands for anything. Now, I don't think Chara exists in the Deltarune universe, but the vessel we created does. We know it's stored in the files, and I think the soul will be very happy to see it again. Well guys, this is it for my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I've never made anything like this before, so drop a like, or even better, comment what you think. I'll be happy to see it. Just one note, I didn't think fit in the video. I don't think this means Chara is a gunner or made by WD Gaster or anything like that. I think it's more probable they're like an organic vessel or the original vessel or something like that. We don't really know enough about vessels or even about gunners in general to delve too deep into that question. So I thought it better left out all this Yester stuff. So that's it. Thanks. Bye.